The following episode features a historic article from the Nebraska History Magazine. This article may reflect the language and attitudes of its time, and while it offers valuable insight into the past, may contain expressions or viewpoints that are outdated or offensive by today's standards. Any outdated terms do not reflect the current views or perspectives of the Nebraska State Historical Society. Welcome to the Nebraska History Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Goforth. Each episode, we explore articles written and published in Nebraska History Magazine. What did the legendary Oglala war chief Crazy Horse really look like? Though no credible photograph has ever been found, descriptions from those who knew him paint a vivid picture. Today we'll explore the circumstances that prevented a photo from ever being taken and share first-hand accounts of his appearance. Let's begin our journey to understand What Did Crazy Horse Look Like by Randy Kane, published in 2018. The site where Crazy Horse was killed is located on the 1870s parade ground within Fort Robinson State Park in the northwest corner of Nebraska. Visitors to the site often ask if Crazy Horse had his picture taken, and if not, why, and what did he look like? This article examines why the famous Oglala war chief likely never had his image taken and also examines the recorded descriptions of Crazy Horse by those who knew him. Though no historically credible photo of Crazy Horse has ever been found, a number of images have been proffered over the years. All have been shown to be lacking. Much of the desire to have an image of the notable Oglala war chief rests with his fame in leading warriors against the army during the summer of 1876. He is credited with stalemating Crook at the Battle of Rosebud and annihilating Custer at Little Bighorn. The combination of personality, cultural alienation, and especially the narrow time frame when a photograph of Crazy Horse could have been taken together make the existence of a photograph unlikely. Crazy Horse surrendered, along with almost 900 of his people, near Camp Robinson on May 6, 1877. Their teepees were in tatters, and most of their dogs had been eaten, along with some of their horses. Crazy Horse was reluctant and distrustful of the whites, but determined to make the best of a situation that he was being forced into. The federal government, through the military, initially catered to Crazy Horse in hopes of using his influence to obtain his people's adaptation to agency life. As the summer progressed, however, that hope faded. The chance to gain Crazy Horse's image was fleeting. He lived in the white man's world for only 4 months before he was killed on September 5, 1877. This window of opportunity was further reduced when, by mid-August, his wish for an agency further north in the Powder River country remained unfulfilled, and the promise of a buffalo hunt for his people in that country was canceled. Crazy Horse became sullen and withdrawn from the white world. The opportunity to have his photograph taken was available, however, at least during the early summer of 1877. As many as 9 photographers were present at Camp Robinson and Red Cloud Agency from 1874 to 1877. 5 were recorded as being present in 1877 alone. First Lieutenant Thomas Wilhelm, a Civil War veteran, was the first photographer to visit Red Cloud and Spotted Tail agencies in May of 1874. Wilhelm repeatedly encountered distrust of his camera by the Indians. Quote, "They initially saw the black and white images as shadows of themselves, captured and locked into the paper or tintype. They thought the camera somehow captured some part of their own power, hence the reference to photographers as shadow catchers," end quote. Newspaper correspondent Robert Strayhorn visited Camp Robinson in late January 1877 as the first bands of northern Oglala and Cheyenne began to come in and surrender at the agencies. He noticed a small log cabin studio doing a lively business near the post trader's store, but no identification of the studio is given, and no surviving photographs exist from this studio. James H. Hamilton, who had a studio in Sioux City, Iowa, arrived at Red Cloud and Spotted Tail agencies sometime in August of 1877. Hamilton once attempted to get a picture of a delegation of Lakota going to Washington, D.C., but they balked when the tube of the camera reminded them of a cannon barrel. Some photographers enlisted a white man the Indians trusted, such as trader J.W. Deere, to allay their fears. Others had a white man sit close while they photographed the Indians. Hamilton did include in his list of stereoscopic images a portrait labeled 104, Crazy Horse. However, An example of this image with the negative number marked 104. However, an example of this image with the negative number marked 104 on it has not been found. Camp Robinson Post Surgeon Dr. Valentine McGillicuddy, who attended to Crazy Horse's sick wife during the summer of 1877, said he tried hard to have a picture taken of the war chief, but that Crazy Horse's invariable reply was, quote, "My friend, why should you wish to shorten my life by taking from me my shadow?" End quote. Red Cloud Agency interpreter William Garnett offered another explanation. He replied to a later inquiry from McGillicuddy that, quote, "Crazy Horse never had a picture taken that I know of, and if there was one taken, someone sneaked up and took it, for he never would consent to be photographed. He was very peculiar about this, and was a very modest man considering his fighting ability and bravery," end quote. The failure to take a photograph of Crazy Horse can be marked down both to resistance and to lack of opportunity. First, Crazy Horse lived near the agency, in the white man's world, for only 4 months. This time period when he could have possibly been induced to have his photograph taken was further reduced when he became alienated by the government's failure to respond to his wishes by mid-August. Secondly, it's possible he distrusted the white man's image-making machine, that it would somehow capture some of his personal power. Crazy Horse did not live long enough to overcome this distrust. It's interesting that 2 of his chief lieutenants who surrendered with him, He Dog and Little Big Man, were not photographed until after his death, September 5, 1877. Finally, Crazy Horse tended to eschew public display. Having his picture taken was foreign to his nature. 2 men close to Crazy Horse for most of his life, and who commented later on his physical appearance, were Horn Chips and He Dog. Horn Chips, 4 years older than Crazy Horse, was raised in the same Oglala camp, becoming his adopted brother by ceremony and spiritual mentor as they grew to manhood. It was Horn Chips who counseled Crazy Horse on what to wear and what charms to carry to protect him in battle. He directed Crazy Horse to wear only 1 feather. Crazy Horse never wore a war bonnet. Horn Chips said Crazy Horse painted his face with a zigzag streak of red earth from the top of his forehead down one side of his nose to his chin, which represented lightning. Other selected items were carried on his person or in a pouch. Horn Chips described Crazy Horse as, quote, "a small man in stature, rather light in frame and weight, and light in complexion," end quote. His hair was always light, reaching down below his hips. In a later interview, Horn Chips stated, quote, "Crazy Horse was of medium height and was slender, light hair and light complexion, and full face. He was a full-blood Oglala," end quote. He Dog was a fellow Oglala warrior who was born the same year as Crazy Horse. Said He Dog, quote, "We grew up together in the same band, played together, courted girls together, and fought together," end quote. When they were young men, the Oglala band divided into 2 groups. He Dog and Crazy Horse stayed with the camp, led by Man Afraid of His Horse. Later, Man Afraid of His Horse's band divided again. He Dog went with the northern half, and Crazy Horse stayed with the southern half. As a result of their prowess in battle and leadership in peace, both were appointed shirt wearers, or protectors of the people, of the respective bands. When Crazy Horse came into Camp Robinson the spring of 1877, He Dog's participation at the surrender ceremony was second only to that of Crazy Horse. He Dog described Crazy Horse as having very light-colored hair. Quote, "His father was an Oglala Sioux. His mother was a Minikawoju Sioux. He was not a very big man. He was of medium stature and build," end quote. During the summer of 1870, Crazy Horse induced Black Buffalo Woman, wife of fellow Oglala warrior No Water, to elope with him while No Water was away. Upon returning to their village and finding his wife gone, No Water tracked them down, walked into the teepee where Crazy Horse was lodged, and fired point blank into his face. Crazy Horse was severely wounded, but recovered. The wound left a pronounced scar on the left side of Crazy Horse's face. Horn Chips and He Dog give us the most exact descriptions of the scar. Horn Chips said of the wound in Crazy Horse's face that, quote, The ball entered at the side of his nose, low down on the right side, and came out the base of the skull on the backside, end quote. This is countered by He-Dog, who said, quote, no water shot him just below the left nostril. The bullet followed the line of teeth and fractured his upper jaw, end quote. Others who witnessed the scar on Crazy Horse's face during the summer of 1877 corroborate that the scar was on the left side of his face. George Washington Oakes, who hauled freight to Camp Robinson in 1877, saw Crazy Horse 3 or 4 times. He said Crazy Horse had quite a scar on his left cheek. A sketch described by interpreter Louis Bordeaux, Crazy Horse's relation Mrs. Amos Clown, and other close associates give a fair, legible facial appearance of Crazy Horse. This source shows and states that the scar was on the left cheek. Also, an unidentified newspaper reporter for the New York Sun wrote of Crazy Horse when he came in to surrender on May 6, 1877, quote, a bullet wound through his left cheek disfigures his face and gives to the mouth a drawn and somewhat fierce or brutal expression, end quote. That the bullet wound left a pronounced scar on his face was also confirmed by a reporter for the New York Tribune on May 7, 1877. Quote, Crazy Horse is an Oglala Sioux, tall, slender, and about 37 years old. He exhibits 2 bullet wounds, one through the face, leaving an ugly scar, end quote. Other Oglala warriors who grew up with Crazy Horse and who commented on his appearance, including Red Feather, who was the younger brother of Crazy Horse's first wife and a member of Crazy Horse's band, 1876 to 1877. Red Feather said, quote, Crazy Horse was a nice-looking man with brown, not black hair, a sharp nose, and narrow face. His nose was straight and thin. His hair was very long, straight, and fine in texture, end quote. Short Bull, youngest brother of He-Dog, also described Crazy Horse's appearance. Quote, Crazy Horse was a man not very tall and not very short, neither broad nor thin. His hair was very light. He was a trifle under 6 feet tall, had a very light complexion, much lighter than other Indians. His features were not like the rest of us. His face was not broad, and he had a sharp, high nose. He had black eyes and hardly ever looked straight at a man, end quote. Finally, we have Little Killer, who was connected to Crazy Horse by marriage, being the youngest brother of Club Man, who married Crazy Horse's sister. Little Killer was a member of Crazy Horse's band and a personal admirer. He said, quote, Crazy Horse was a short little man. He did not have black hair. He had brown hair like a white man's and long, straight nose. His eyes were black like the Lakotas, end quote. White Bull, a Miniconjou Lakota warrior who fought in both the Fetterman fight and at the Little Bighorn with Crazy Horse, said that the last time he saw Crazy Horse was after the Little Bighorn fight and before the Battle of Slim Buttes in September of 1876. White Bull came upon a party led by Crazy Horse returning from a raid in the Black Hills. White Bull said, quote, that evening, Crazy Horse wore white cloth leggings and a white muslin shirt for a robe. His face was not painted, end quote. White Bull described Crazy Horse as being about 5 feet 10 inches tall, quote, but slimmer, with a light complexion, small, sharp nose, quiet in manner, and rated a good warrior, end quote. Later in a separate interview, White Bull described the battle dress of Crazy Horse as follows, quote, in a fight, he generally wore white buckskin suit, both shirt and leggings, painted his face with small white spots. His hair he wore loose and flying. This costume, paint, and hairdo were the wotaway, or battle charm of Crazy Horse, end quote. Other witnesses to Crazy Horse's appearance were primarily mixed-blood scouts and interpreters. Frank Garrard knew Crazy Horse longer than did any of the others. Garrard was of mixed race, either Pacific Islander and white or black and Indian. He was captured by the Sioux around 1869 and initially lived in Sitting Bull's camp. After a serious falling out with Sitting Bull, he went on to live with Crazy Horse's Oglala band in 1873. sometime in the spring or early summer of 1875, he drifted into Camp Robinson and became a scout for the Army. He was General Crook's most trusted scout during the 1876 campaigns. Garrard had this to say of Crazy Horse's appearance, quote, "Crazy Horse had somewhat peculiar features. He had sandy hair and was very light complexion. He didn't have the high cheekbones that the Indians generally have. He was a young-looking Indian, appeared much younger than his age. There were a few powder marks on one side of his face," end quote. Garrard later commented, quote, "Crazy Horse was remarkably white for an Indian. His hair, which was sandy brown, was unlike any other man's in the tribe," end quote. Garrard said Crazy Horse was fine-looking, quote, "A trifle less than 6 feet tall. He was straight as an arrow. He was naturally spare and could stand any amount of hardship," end quote. A number of other interpreters interacted with Crazy Horse during the summer of 1877. William Garnett, the son of an Army officer and an Oglala woman at Fort Laramie, was an interpreter at Red Cloud Agency and was actively involved as an interpreter for the Army that summer. Garnett, who witnessed Crazy Horse's fatal struggle with Little Big Man outside of the guardhouse of Camp Robinson, said that Crazy Horse was relatively small in frame compared to his antagonist. Garnett later wrote, quote, "Crazy Horse was an Indian a little past 30 years old when he was killed. Crazy Horse never wore a war bonnet in his life, and I am very sure he never had his photograph taken," end quote. Louis Bordeaux, the son of trader James Bordeaux and a Brule woman, became a government interpreter at Spotted Tail Agency and Camp Sheridan. He was also active as an interpreter at Camp Robinson during the summer of 1877. Bordeaux said that Crazy Horse was, quote, "slight in form, tall, very light in complexion, hair long and hung down to his hips," end quote. Baptiste Big Bat Poirier was another interpreter of French extraction born in St. Charles, Missouri. At age 14, he moved west as a teamster with Indian traders. He married Josephine Richard, an Oglala mixed blood of French extraction. The Army employed him as a scout, guide, and interpreter for many years. He was active in the Sioux campaigns of 1876. Poirier, who thought highly of Crazy Horse, said that he was, quote, "a slim, light man, weight of about 140 pounds," end quote. Louis Bordeaux's sister, Susan, said this of Crazy Horse's appearance, quote, "My husband, Charles Tackett, was a scout, but when he was not on duty, he clerked at Jewett's store at Spotted Tail Agency and had waited on Crazy Horse. My mother-in-law and I drove up to the store one day when Crazy Horse was there. She pointed him out to me. He was a very handsome young man of about 36 years or so. He was not so dark. He had hazel eyes, nice, long, light brown hair. His scalp lock was ornamented with beads and hung clear to his waist. His braids were wrapped in fur. He was above medium height and was slender," end quote. White men also commented on Crazy Horse's appearance. Post Surgeon Dr. Valentine McGillicuddy came to know Crazy Horse well during the summer of 1877 while attending the chief's wife, who was sick with tuberculosis. McGillicuddy was also the attending surgeon at Crazy Horse's wounding and death. In the 1920s, his response to a picture purported to be of Crazy Horse, McGillicuddy decided it was a fake. Referring to his unusual appearance for a Lakota, McGillicuddy stated, quote, "Crazy Horse was a strange-looking Indian, and I would have known him anywhere," end quote. Lieutenant John Gregory Bork, who spent many years as an aide to General George Crook in both Arizona and the Northern Plains, and became his chronicler. He was active in the Sioux campaigns of 1876. Bork wrote that following comment upon Crazy Horse's surrender on May 6 of 1877, quote, "I saw before me a man who looked quite young, not over 30 years old, 5 feet 8 inches high, lithe and sinewy, with a scar on his face. The expression of his countenance was one of quiet dignity, but morose, dogged, tenacious, and melancholy. He behaved with stolidity, like a man who realized he had to give in to fate, but would do so as sullenly as possible," end quote. Lieutenant Colonel Luther Bradley became commander of Camp Robinson in late May 1877. Bradley saw extensive service in the Civil War and became Brigadier General of Volunteers at the end of the war. He became lieutenant colonel of the 9th Infantry on March 15, 1869. It was Bradley who oversaw events during the summer of 1877 that eventually resulted in the death of Crazy Horse. Upon meeting Crazy Horse for the first time in May of 1877, Bradley wrote to his wife, quote, "I had an introduction to Crazy Horse and a handshake. He is a young, slender, and mild-mannered fellow, but is evidently the leader of his band," end quote. From these first-hand accounts, we get an impression of what Crazy Horse looked like. That he was somewhat different in appearance from the average Lakota man is evident. He had light skin and light hair that hung down well below his waist. He had a somewhat narrow face with a sharp, straight nose and lacked the prominent cheekbones of the majority of his people. The bullet wound delivered by No Water struck the jawbone just to the left and below the left nostril, glancing off the underlying bone structure and deflecting through the fleshy layer of the gum and the cheek, fracturing the upper jaw before exiting near the neck at the base of the skull. The bullet wound gave the left side of his mouth a drawn and fierce expression. He appeared to be slightly above average height, possibly 5 feet 10 inches, but light in frame and weight. Purported Crazy Horse images persist to this day. One tintype repeatedly surfaces, though it has been generally discredited by historians. The privately owned Custer Battlefield Trading Post and the Custer Battlefield Museum in Gary Owen, Montana, each promote this tintype as an authentic image of the Oglala chief. The image shows a man with broad cheekbones, lacking a sharp beak-like nose, with no evident scarring or disfigurement on his face. In addition, he wears a breastplate that He-Dog and other Oglala contemporaries of Crazy Horse said he was not known to have worn. Finally, the elaborately painted backdrop suggests an urban studio rather than that of Red Cloud Agency or Camp Robinson. The stone carving of the Crazy Horse Memorial in the Black Hills does partially match his description, a relatively narrow face and straight beak-like nose. However, there is no evidence of disfigurement on the left side of the sculpture's face. So why should we care what Crazy Horse looked like? To this, I reply that his prominence as a Lakota warrior chief demands attention. Sitting Bull, Red Cloud, and Spotted Tail all lived long enough to have their photograph taken numerous times. Crazy Horse did not. The window of opportunity to have his photo taken was limited to 3 or 4 months by mid-August 1877. His wishes denied, he had become so alienated from white authority that he was barely approachable. In addition, he either failed to overcome his distrust of photo technology or had some cultural aversion, or having his photo taken was simply not important to him. It is quite possible that his personality precluded any chance that he would live long enough to consent to having his photograph taken. Thank you for listening to the Nebraska History Podcast. To learn more about Nebraska History Magazine, to listen to more podcast episodes, or to support our podcast by becoming a member of the Nebraska State Historical Society, go to history.nebraska.gov/podcast. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast and get notified when we release new episodes on your favorite podcast platform. Until next time, I'm Chris Goforth.